Are you serious? Mark's eyes slid across the room, full of expensive suits and watches worth the price of an apartment. Yes, let her in. Everyone laughed. You must be joking, echoed from the corner. But the master of the table, gray-haired and always calm Soren, didn't even smile. He pressed the call button. Bring in, what's her name? Helen, the one who mops the floors. A minute later, the door opened. A young woman in a simple gray uniform, a bucket in hand, froze when she saw a dozen men and women in designer outfits. Come in, Soren nodded toward an empty chair. We're in negotiations here, but we need a fresh perspective. The room filled again with chuckles. For them, it was just a joke. Why would anyone care about a janitor's opinion on a deal worth hundreds of millions? Helen set down the bucket, wiped her palms on her apron, and asked softly, "Are you sure?" "Sit," Soren repeated, and his voice was such that no one dared argue. She sat. A folder with the contract was placed before her, and in that moment, something unexpected happened. Her gaze turned cold and calculating. She flipped through the pages quickly, confidently, as though she were a lawyer with 20 years' experience. "There's an error here," she said without lifting her eyes. "If you sign this clause, the company will lose its controlling stake within a year." The laughter died instantly. "What?" one of the partners asked. Helen pointed at the page. "Here, a hidden clause, granting priority purchase rights. Do you see the wording?" The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. One of the attorneys jerked forward, snatched the contract from her hands, and began reading feverishly. "She's right," he stammered after a minute. And in that instant, every eye turned toward the girl who yesterday had been washing their cups. "Who are you?" Soren asked quietly, looking at her as though seeing her for the first time. Helen raised her eyes. "Just a janitor," and the corners of her lips twitched ever so slightly. What had started as a joke turned into a storm. The negotiations collapsed. The counterparty who had brought the contract turned pale and whispered something to his assistant. "You knew about this clause?" Soren rose. His voice was cold as steel. It's a standard formulation," the guest tried to explain. "Get out," Soren cut him off. When the door shut behind them, silence fell. "Explain," Soren said to Helen. "There's nothing to explain. I used to work at a law firm that drafted contracts like this. They fired me when I refused to turn a blind eye to fraud." "And you came to mop floors in my office?" Soren narrowed his eyes. "It's the only place that would hire me without recommendations," she shrugged. Someone whistled quietly. "You realize you just saved this company from losing half its assets?" one of the top managers said. Helen shrugged again, as if it didn't matter. "Interesting." Soren sat back down. "What if I offer you a contract not for cleaning, but for a position as attorney? And what if I refuse?" For the first time, she smiled. The room froze once more. Then, Soren slowly smiled back. "You just became the most dangerous woman in this building." Meanwhile, outside the door, the counterparty clutched his phone, calling someone. "We have a problem. She's here." The person on the other end stayed silent for a long time before saying, quietly, "Remove her, tonight." The night in the office was dark and silent. Security had already locked the entrance, but Soren still sat in his office without turning on the lights. On his desk lay that same contract, now covered with red markings. He replayed the girl's words in his mind. Was it just chance that on the day of the biggest deal she happened to be nearby? Too convenient. The door creaked softly. His secretary peeked in. "Boss, she's already left the building. Walked out at 9 sharp, as always." "Track where she goes," Soren ordered. "But she's just a janitor." "She's saved us billions. Find her address." The secretary nodded and slipped out. Meanwhile, Helen walked along a narrow street, carrying a bag of cheap groceries. By her building, a black car with tinted windows waited. She noticed it instantly. stopped, as if recalling something, and pretended to search for keys in her purse. The car rolled forward slowly, stopping a little further away. "It begins," she whispered in her breath. Instead of entering her building, she suddenly veered into the courtyard, vaulted a low fence, and vanished into the darkness of the neighboring alley. A minute later, 2 men in suits stepped out of the car. "Where is she?" One scanned the yard. "She was right here." The other pointed at the tracks. "She went that way." They ran off. But Helen was already gone. The next day, Soren himself went to her shabby apartment building. A neighbor answered the door. "Have you seen her?" he asked. "Helen? She came back at night, packed a suitcase and left. She said she was going away for a couple of days." Soren frowned. "If she returns, call me." He handed over his business card. The woman nodded, eyeing him with thinly veiled curiosity. Men like him never came to this neighborhood. That same evening, a folder of information on Helen landed on Soren's desk. Law degree. Former employee of the largest firm in the city. Fired a year ago under suspicion of leaking confidential information. The case was hushed. Investigators vanished from the process, and the girl's name appeared on blacklists. "Who fired her?" Soren asked. "The board of directors of Kelvin and Partners," his aide replied. And here's the curious part. 1 week after her dismissal, the firm won a lawsuit worth $1 billion. Soren smirked. So, she refused to sign forged papers back then. That's why she was mopping floors. He stood. "Find her and protect her. From today, she's our greatest asset." But Helen wasn't rushing to return. She hid in a cheap hostel on the edge of town, changed SIM cards, and never opened her door to anyone. One night, footsteps echoed in the corridor. She killed the light and pressed herself to the wall. A click at the lock. Someone was trying to open her door. Helen pulled an old pepper spray canister under the bed and braced herself. The door opened, and a tall man stepped inside. "Quiet," he said, raising his hands. "I'm not an enemy." "Another lawyer pretending to help?" she asked coldly. "No." He took a step forward. "Soren sent me." She lowered the spray slightly, but didn't put it away. "Why?" "He offers protection and work." "Tell him I'm not for sale," she snapped. The man smirked. "Do you really think you have a choice?" At that moment, the sound of a car arriving came from outside. "Hurry," he said. "They found you." The very next second, the hostel door burst open and 2 masked men rushed down the corridor. The man grabbed Helen's hand, yanked her from the room, and they dashed to the back exit. Shouts echoed from the stairwell. "Faster!" The man shoved the door open. They ran into the night toward a waiting car. Bullets cracked against the asphalt near them. Gasping, Helen slid into the back seat. "Who are they?" she asked. "Those who want you silenced forever," the man replied, starting the engine. "Now hold on." The car roared forward into the darkness. An hour later, they reached Soren's country house. "Well, hello," he said, greeting her at the door. "You're under my protection now." "I didn't ask for it," Helen answered wearily, "but now you have no choice." His voice was gentle but carried steel. "You've officially been drawn into this war." Helen smirked, though her eyes held no fear. "Well then, show me the documents." Soren raised his brows in surprise. "If I'm in this game, I want to know who we're fighting." Soren led her into a spacious office where printouts already covered the table. Contracts, financial reports, foreign correspondence. "This is everything we know," he said. "Kelvin and Partners tried to push a merger through a shell company. You ruined their plan. Now they'll take revenge." Helen leafed through the papers in silence. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from anger. "They forged signatures," she said quietly. "I remember this contract. They pressured me to certify it, and I refused." "And they crew you out," Soren finished for her. "Not just me." Her eyes gleamed. "They fired everyone who tried to defend me.
2 of them were later found dead. Soren sank into a chair across from her. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Helen smirked. "Because back then, their attorneys held every key position. Any case against them collapsed. And now," Soren narrowed his eyes.
"Now we have a chance," she answered, and for the first time her voice carried steel. "If we expose their correspondence and evidence, they'll lose their license." Soren leaned forward. "You have access?" "I kept backups. I knew this day would come." She pulled a flash drive from her jacket. Soren took it silently but didn't power up the computer. "Do you realize, once we open this, there'll be no way back?" "For me, there hasn't been for a long time," Helen said. They worked until dawn. Emails, documents, money transfers through offshore accounts filled the screen. "This is dynamite," one of Soren's analysts said, pointing at the files. "If we release this, not only will they collapse, but half their partners too." "Are you sure you want such a war?" Helen asked, turning to Soren. He stayed silent, studying her face, then said, "This isn't just my war anymore." By morning, they called a closed meeting. Only Soren's most trusted people sat in the room. "Here's our new lawyer," he introduced Helen. "She saved the company, and now she'll lead us to victory." Someone scoffed. "She's a janitor." "Yesterday she was a janitor," Soren said harshly. "Today she's our trump card." Helen stepped forward, spreading documents across the table. "If we act wisely, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll strike first. Here's the plan." She spoke calmly, confidently. The people around exchanged glances. Before them wasn't a timid cleaner, but a strategist seeing 3 moves ahead. By evening, the plan was ready. Step 1. Block their access to key assets. Step 2. File a countersuit. Step 3. Leak part of the data to the press to stir a storm. "They'll fight to the bitter end," one top manager warned. "And that's exactly what we need," Helen smiled coldly. "The harder they fight, the more mistakes they'll make." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, "She's alive," a man in a costly suit said grimly, staring at surveillance photos. "And now she's working for Soren." "Then we take out both of them," his partner suggested. "No. First, we get the flash drive. Without it, they're powerless." That night, 2 men broke into Soren's country house. But instead of a defenseless girl, they met alarms and armed guards. Helen stood at the staircase, holding a baseball bat, watching as security restrained the intruders. "You knew they'd come?" Soren asked. "Of course. We left too many traces for them to resist." "And you didn't tell me?" "If I had, you would have tightened security, and they wouldn't have risked it. Now we've got their men alive." Soren paused, then smirked. "You're more dangerous than I thought." Helen looked straight at him. "You wanted war. I know how to win it." The captives were interrogated. Eventually, one of them spoke. "We weren't just ordered to take the flash drive. We were hired to stage an accident." "Who?" Soren demanded. "Your partner, Mr. Lanner." The room fell silent. "Lanner?" Soren repeated. "He sat with us at the table yesterday." "Exactly," Helen noted. "And he was the one who pushed that contract." Soren exhaled slowly. "So the rat was beside us all along. What will you do?" "First, stay silent," he answered. "Let him think we're still blind." "Perfect," Helen said. "I already have a plan to force him into direct contact." "How?" She smiled. "We'll bait him." The next morning, a rumor spread throughout the company. Helen drafted a new contract that closes all risks. The document is already on Soren's desk. It wasn't true. No such contract existed. But whispers traveled fast, reaching the right ears within hours. Lanner strolled into Soren's office with a perfectly calm face. "I hear you've got a new document," he said, dropping into a chair.
Soren nodded. Yes, we revised the deal terms. This time, everything's clean. May I see it? Of course. Soren handed him a folder. In reality, it was a forgery Helen had prepared, fabricated clauses pointing to a supposed restructuring plan. Lanner skimmed the pages, but his gaze lingered on the third clause. Interesting wording, he remarked. You don't like it? Soren asked evenly. On the contrary, Lanner smiled. It's brilliant. But the moment he left the office, Helen, watching from the next room, said, he bit. How can you tell? He remembered the third clause. Tonight, he'll send men to steal the document. That evening, Soren's team prepped the house for visitors. Cameras, hidden microphones, security on alert. Helen insisted on leaving the folder inside the safe. Insane plain sight. He has to believe it's real. And if they come armed? Soren asked. Even better, she answered coldly. We'll catch them red-handed. Night. Silence. Only the moonlight shone through the windows. At 2 a.m., the doors were pried open. 2 masked men slipped inside. The cameras caught every move. They cracked the safe, pulled out the folder, and prepared to leave. When suddenly, the lights blazed on. Freeze! Security shouted. The men tried to run, but Soren stepped out of the corridor, Helen at his side. And where are you going? Her voice was icy. Don't you want to discuss who sent you? One stayed silent, the other jerked nervously, only to be struck down by a guard's rifle butt. We know it was Lanner, but we need proof. The first intruder raised his head slowly. If I talk, they'll kill me. If you don't, you'll go to prison, Soren said calmly. The man hesitated, then nodded. Fine, Lanner's meeting the client tomorrow at the Enso Club. That's where they'll discuss how to get rid of you. Perfect, Helen said, after the captives were led away. So tomorrow, we'll be there first. That's dangerous, Soren warned. More dangerous is doing nothing. If we don't catch them with evidence, they'll strike first. The next evening, they arrived at the club. Helen wore an elegant black dress, her hair pinned back, her gaze cold and focused. Are you sure you're ready for this? Soren asked. I've been ready since the day they threw me out of the firm, she said, and walked inside. They took a table in the corner with a clear view of the hall. Half an hour later, Lanner entered, accompanied by the same man in the expensive suit Helen had seen in photos. There they are, she whispered. Microphones planted earlier began transmitting sound. The document is with them. Tomorrow they'll file a lawsuit, Lanner said. Then tomorrow there must be an incident, the man replied. Neither Soren nor that girl must survive. Helen clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. Is this enough? She asked quietly. More than enough, Soren answered. We have the recording. But leaving early was risky. They might say more. What about the flash drive? Lanner asked. We'll take it after the funeral, he chuckled. Soren signaled the security detail. Time. Within minutes, the club was surrounded. Lanner and his partner suddenly found themselves face to face with Soren and Helen. Traitors, Soren said softly. Lanner paled. You don't understand. I understand. You tried to kill me. She stepped forward, locking eyes with him. But the game's over. Guards snapped handcuffs onto both men. Take them to the police, Soren ordered. Are you satisfied? Soren asked once they were alone. Helen exhaled. Not yet. This is only the beginning. Their network runs deeper than one Lanner. Soren nodded. Then we continue. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, a spark passed between them. They were no longer just allies, but partners in a war. We have a long night ahead, Helen said. Bring me everything you've got. I'm finishing what I started a year ago. The following days turned into hell. Soren's team worked around the clock. Attorneys drafted lawsuits, analysts checked accounts, IT specialists dug through archives for evidence. Helen barely slept. She sat at her laptop, eyes burning into lines of code, and scanned documents as though she could burn through them. "You're wearing yourself out," Soren said one night, stepping into the office. "I don't have the right to stop," she replied, without looking up. "They ruined so many lives. I have to finish this." "You've already done more than anyone expected." Helen lifted her gaze. "You want me to give up?" Soren shook his head. "I want you alive when this is over." At dawn, they received the final piece of evidence: bank transfers signed by the very people behind the attempt on Helen's life. "This is it," the analyst said, handing her a flash drive. "With these files, they'll go away for 20 years. "Excellent," Helen nodded. "Prepare the statement for the prosecutor's office." "Are you sure? Once we take this step, there's no way back." "There never was," she said with a faint smile. "You taught me that yourself." The day of the trial became a spectacle that drew half the city. Journalists swarmed the courthouse, cameras capturing every step. When Helen walked into the hall, camera flashes blinded her, but she strode proudly in a tailored suit as if entering battle. The defense tried to postpone the hearing, but the prosecutor, backed by Soren, insisted on proceeding. "The court accepts the materials," the judge announced, and murmurs filled the hall. Video from the club, correspondence, bank records, all were laid out on the table. Lanner sat pale, his lawyers whispering frantically, but it was clear. There was no escape. "The court rules," the judge's voice carried across the room, "to initiate criminal proceedings and remand the accused in custody until sentencing." The journalists erupted in flashes. Helen allowed herself the first smile in months. After the hearing, she and Soren stepped outside. The sun shone brightly, as if the city itself had grown cleaner. "Well," he said, looking at her, "you won." "We won," she corrected, "but this is only the start." "What do you mean?" "Their network extends far beyond Lanner. They have partners overseas, offshore accounts, shadow companies." Soren smirked. "You want to keep hunting?" "I want to clean the market of those who think they can buy people and destinies," she said firmly. He looked at her with respect. "Then you'll have to stay in this company." "I'll stay, but not as a lawyer." "As who then?" Helen turned to him and said, "As a partner." Soren froze, then smiled. "Welcome to the game." A month passed. Newspapers wrote about sensational arrests. The stock exchange reacted nervously to the news, and Helen's name became a symbol of the fight against corporate corruption. In Soren's office now stood a second desk, hers. "Get used to it," she said, sorting through papers. "We've only just begun." Soren poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "To the woman who turned my world upside down," he said, raising his glass. "And you turned mine," she replied. They clinked glasses. "What's next?" he asked. Helen smiled, eyes flashing with fire. "Next, we hunt." And at that moment, Soren realized that for the first time in years, life truly interested him again. But somewhere far away, across the ocean, another man hung up a call. "Lanner confessed?" a shadowy voice asked. "Yes, and he named everyone he knew." "Good," the voice chuckled coldly. "Then it's time to remove her, too." He looked at Helen's photo on his screen and said, "This game isn't over." Helen sat in her new office, studying another set of documents. She could feel it. The storm was still ahead, and this time, she was ready. At the billion-dollar negotiation table, Soren suddenly invited the janitor. Everyone laughed until she picked up the contract.